I'm Stephen Roy Goodman, host of Higher Education Today, a production of the University of the District of Columbia. Welcome back to the education program that connects you to contemporary issues, people, and institutions involved in the world of higher education. Today we'll be talking about Nazarbayev University. Dr. Simon Jones is provost of Nazarbayev University, which was founded in 2009. The university is based in Astana, Kazakhstan, in Central Asia. As provost, Simon has arranged partnerships with educational institutions in the US, the UK, and Singapore. Simon is former president of Abu Dhabi Men's College and former CEO of MIT's Media Lab Europe. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here today, Steve.
Well, we're delighted that you made the time while you're in Washington. And maybe if we could start with your accent, which struck me as being kind of interesting when we first chatted. You're British, but somehow you're the provost of a major institution in a new country.
Yes, indeed. I probably think I'm a sign of the globalization of higher education these days. Globalization affects most parts of industry, and I think higher education is no exception. What's happened, I think, in the last 10 to 15 years is that with the growth of the economies in the Eastern Hemisphere, also a large number of interesting initiatives in higher education have developed in that region. And I've always been a builder. I've always been interested in new challenges. So for the last 10 years or so, I've been helping institutions develop either new branches or completely brand new models. I've done it in Europe for MIT. I've done it in the United Arab Emirates. And I'm trying to do it in Kazakhstan. Perhaps I should say for most people, because when you tell them I'm from Kazakhstan, they say, where? Well, Kazakhstan is actually the 7th largest country in the world. It's somewhere between Russia and China. It's on the same sort of latitude as India. And in terms of size, it's about 4 Texases.
Well, maybe if you could say a word or two about the education system in Kazakhstan as well. So what percentage of students finish high school? What percentage of students move on to higher education?
Yeah, I mean, Kazakhstan was originally part of the former Soviet Union. And the former Soviet Union had a fully developed higher education system. It wasn't like the one that you'd see in the West, but it certainly existed, and there was high participation rates, and certainly high participation rates of ethnic minorities as well, which was part of the characteristic of the Soviet Union. Traditionally, they worked on a 5-year university degree, which they would consider equivalent to a master's degree. Post-CIS, when these countries became independent, and Kazakhstan became independent, I think, in 1991, there was a move to a more recognizably Western tradition with a 3 or 4 year first degree, a master's degree after that, and then a doctoral degree. So you're seeing in Kazakhstan what I think you're seeing in many parts of the world is a move towards a recognizably American or European higher education model. So these days, Kazakhstan has very many universities. It has traditional state universities, it has private universities, and it has universities which are partnerships between other institutions. So for example, we have a Kazakh British Technical University, which has been set up a few years ago. But Nazarbayev University is an attempt to do something very different. It's an explicit attempt to create a research university, and a research university fit for the challenges of the 21st century, where wealth generation, addressing social problems, and the generation of knowledge are all seen as integral parts. They're all aspects of the mission and not separable. It's also creating an institution which meets the challenges that Central Asia faces. It's growing in population, it's rapidly industrializing, it's becoming wealthy, mainly through minerals and materials like that. And the university is there to help support the generation of civic society, to help support the development of Kazakh and regional industry, and to help provide an educated population, which in the long run is the best guarantee of economic and social success for a nation.
And how does a research university do that? I mean, we've had some challenges here in the United States where some politicians have basically argued, well, this university is a terrific university, but it really has very little to do with the people around it.
Yep. Well, I mean, we are a unique model, and we're creating a research university from scratch. Don't forget, in the traditional form of the Soviet Union, universities taught and research centres researched. They didn't do teaching and research. So it is a new model. And the way that we've chosen to do it is through partnerships. We've partnered with 6 of the top 30 universities in the world. And each one of those universities is aligned with one of our major schools. In the initial period, these universities have helped us with curriculum, with faculty, with organising and beginning. Now, as we move from our 3rd to 4th year of operation, it's becoming much more a partnership of equals, where we're collaborating on research strategy, faculty exchange, and addressing problems that we see as common to both institutions, but in our case we address it within a Kazakh context. So it's this notion of partnerships allowing you to go further and faster than you could on your own is the core element of the Nazarbayev University strategy.
And in your view, is it actually working?
Yes, it is. I mean, you know, partnerships, like all relationships in life, what you put into it, you get out of it. And certainly you have to put a lot of effort into having a successful partnership. Not least, there are the traditional problems of multicultural partnerships, of understanding each other's approach and perspective. But I've seen some very encouraging things. The University of Pennsylvania, for example, works with us in helping upskill and reskill the school management and higher education leadership. And even at this early stage, you can see the difference that we're making to the leadership of the Kazakh school and higher educational systems. It's early days for sure, but I'm beginning to see some real progress.
Well, you mentioned the University of Pennsylvania.
Yes.
I find it kind of interesting that you have partnerships with multiple universities, particularly in the United States. So at the University of Pennsylvania, for instance, if I understood this correctly, you're working with the education school.
That's correct.
Not with Wharton or not with another division.
Yes.
And then for the business program, you're working with Duke University.
Absolutely.
So you've got different cultures to deal with from university to university,
Yeah.
even here in the US.
Yeah, there's 2 reasons for that, really. The first, it was an explicit strategy. We didn't want to become a branch campus of another university. We wanted to build our own brand and ethos. We also didn't want to become something like an academic city like you see in Qatar, where we provide the facilities and other universities turn up to teach it. So it was specific that we wanted to take that approach. The other thing is, by engaging with multiple partners, it was probably the only practical way logistically to grow 6, 7, 8 schools simultaneously from scratch. Any one institution wouldn't have had the resources to be able to do that for us. Now, of course, you know, there are contradictions in such a model as well, and part of my job as provost is to manage those contradictions, because each of those partners have, even though most of them are from America, a slightly different way of viewing the world and of doing things. And part of the challenges I and my vice provosts face is ensuring different routes to the same measurable outcomes. But it's working so far, and I'm convinced, both in terms of establishing our own ethos and credibility, and in terms of being the only practical way of growing very, very quickly, it was the right thing to do.
Well, fair enough. In terms of the way the campus feels,
Yeah.
I've never been on your campus. It's a new campus, and perhaps someday I'll get there, but I haven't been there yet. Does it feel like a campus that that I would visit in the US or the UK?
I think you would be impressed by the quality and style and attention to detail in the design. The campus master plan has been done by some Japanese architects who are also responsible for the master plan of the city that we're in, Astana, itself a new city. It's based around a truly gigantic atrium in which there are palm trees and fountains, and university buildings are clustered around. Don't forget, Kazakhstan can get down to minus 40 degrees in winter. All right, it's a cold winter, it's a hot summer. It's somewhere on the same latitude as Calgary. So this creation of an outdoor space inside the university is an important thing. But you'd see, once you went into the individual buildings, you'd see what you'd always see. You'd see students, you'd see faculties, you'd see labs, you'd see lecture theatres, you'd see libraries. It's done but as a design concept, and particularly as it's a university that's created from scratch, the way everything fits together is really quite impressive.
And what about issues of academic freedom? Are those issues very similar to what we would experience in the US or the UK or even the UAE?
Yeah, I mean, academic freedom, I think, is at the core of any university, okay, if you're going to be successful. And that was recognized at the start, that there is an act passed by the Kazakh parliament, it's called a Majlis, called the Nazarbayev University Act, which guarantees in law the independence of the institution from government ministries and the rights to academic freedom. Beyond that, we have a charter, and if I was to show you the charter, you would see it as really recognizable compared to any American university. Separation of powers between the president, the provost, faculty governance, faculty senate, you'd recognize it. And indeed, it's interesting, my colleagues who work for me, who have come from some large American state universities, say they perceive much less interference from the government at Nazarbayev University than they did when they were back in their original institutions. Faculty talk about a lot of things in Nazarbayev University. They hardly ever talk about academic freedom because it's in the DNA of the system. But it's true, without it, we wouldn't have succeeded.
And what about funding? So I assume that's what you were referring to with your colleagues who came from big state universities, because we have that problem in the United States where quite a few universities make the case that their state funding has been cut relative to their budgets. And of course the debate is always, is the budget higher or were the funds cut?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point. At the moment in our initial startup stage, because so much of it is building and infrastructure, the bulk of our funds come from the government. In the steady state, we see our income coming from three different sources. One is fees paid by students attending to us, and we think in the steady state that'll be about a third of our income. Another third will be an endowment. We're working hard on building the endowment up, and we're having some success. And the third will be from third-party contracts and research grants and things like that. And that should give us a balanced approach. You know, institutional autonomy and academic freedom are two parts of the same coin, and it's very helpful, I think it's essential for any modern institution to have a diversity of sources and not become too dependent on one funder. But at the moment, while there is a very significant building projects going on, it's mainly from the state.
And let's say an American student from Washington, D.C. wanted to go to Nazarbayev University. Could they enroll?
Yes, they can. Yes, they can. We have a set of standards. We have entrance tests to ensure that people, have the academic capability to cope with our programs. It's an English language program, so you don't need any foreign languages. And if you apply and we accept you, you'd be a very welcome student indeed.
And what about housing? Where would I live if I were a student?
We're a residential university. All our students get on-campus accommodation. From that you can deduce it's always going to be a relatively medium-sized university. In our fullest incarnation we'll be about 4,000 undergraduates, 2,500 postgraduates, and we also have a number of national research centres we look at, and there'll be about 2,500 researchers from there. So we're always going to be in the sort of 8,000s. We're not going to be a 40,000 university.
And then the faculty members. Let's assume that I wanted to come to Kazakhstan for a year to teach.
Yep.
How would that work?
Well, we're always on the lookout for faculty because we're growing and we continue to grow. And the reason I'm in DC this week is actually to hire faculty for our School of Humanities and Social Sciences. We're advertising. If you please apply, we'll interview you by video. If we like the look of you, we'll see you in person. And you'd recognize it as pretty much the same as any other US faculty job. It's a 2+2 teaching load. There's a service obligation of about 20% of your time, 40% of your time's for research. It's very similar. I don't see anything different from any of the other universities I've worked at in that respect.
And you mentioned the humanities. If I'm not mistaken, you have a relationship with the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
That's indeed. That is the strategic partner for the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, and it's one of our most successful partners. They're hugely enthusiastic. They have a specialist capability in Central Asia anyway, which kind of helps them understand the way that things are done there. But they're very committed to the project, and they're a pleasure to work with, I have to say.
So then wouldn't there be a disproportionate number of professors from the University of Wisconsin who were at Nazarbayev?
In the first year, for sure, that was the case. But now our faculty come from all four corners of the globe, to be honest. The majority still come from the United States and Canada, North America, shall we say. But a mixture from England, Australia, New Zealand, and the Russian-speaking diaspora as well.
And how would you characterize Nazarbayev University relative to the American University of Afghanistan or Richmond University in London?
Yeah, well, I know them both. I think the truth is we are unequivocally focused on being a research university. Above and beyond graduate education and scholarship, we are here to address core international problems set in a Kazakh context. Okay, so issues, for example, of renewable energy are core to a country like Kazakhstan, which produces so much coal. Issues of pollution and sustainability. This is a country that has had ecological disasters in the Aral Sea, has had nuclear testing in Semipalatinsk in the northeast of the country. Those are global problems, but we're trying to address them in a local context. So above all, we are constructed as a research university. And I think that emphasis is what distinguishes us from other American universities in other parts of the world.
Fair enough. Now, you mentioned the nuclear issue. I think it's probably worth saying a word or two about that. For our audience may not be familiar with what happened with the nuclear weapons that the Soviet Union had in Kazakhstan and all the testing that they did.
Yeah. Well, Kazakhstan and certain parts of Kazakhstan were test sites for the earlier Soviet nuclear weapons programs. Some were underground, some were not, and there were clearly issues with the problems of nuclear experimentation. Post-independence, since 1991, there's only ever been one country that has given up its nuclear weapons. That's Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan had nuclear weapons. With the assistance of the United States government, they put them beyond use, and Kazakhstan is now a nuclear-free power. It was a very brave, it was a very bold decision, but I think it's indicative of the confidence the Kazakhs have that they and they alone know how to deal with their future, and they're quite prepared to take bold steps whenever it's necessitated.
And what is the relationship that Kazakhstan now has with Russia and the other stans?
Well, I think, first of all, Kazakhstan obviously was part of the former Soviet Union, so there are long links with Russia. Also, somewhere around 40% of the population of Kazakhstan are ethnic Russians. And in many parts of Kazakhstan, Russian is the language you hear on the street. In other parts, you'll hear the native language, Kazakh. So there's long and good and positive relations. And they're in a customs union as well, rather like the European Union in terms of trade and all that. So it's very productive. The other large neighbor that they have on their border is, of course, China. And China is clearly a world power these days. Relationships there are good. Indeed, only about 3 months ago, we had the president of China came to our university to give a speech on Kazakh-Sino relationships. But clearly, if you're a small country with a lot of surface area between two very large neighbors, paying attention to those relationships is important, and I think it's been very successful so far.
Great. Well, in terms of the practical education versus theoretical education. Mm-hmm. We have this issue here in the States all the time of, how do we balance students who really want a job and students who want very practical training versus the carrying forth of knowledge for knowledge's sake.
I personally, I'm one of those people who don't see those things in contradiction. Okay, there are undoubtedly some subjects where it is knowledge for knowledge's sake. Pure mathematics, for example, might be an obvious degree. And there are other subjects where you want to do something more practical. Engineering might be one of those subjects. I don't see a conflict. Whether you choose to approach a subject from a practical point of view, if you like, a competency-based, or whether you view it as an intellectual problem, I think good educators can challenge and can stretch students such that they develop. I think that's the mission. But it's true to say it's very competitive to get into Nazarbayev University. We admit 9% of those who apply to us. They have very high academic standards. As is common in that part of the world, math and physics scores are extremely high. So there is a tendency to see things from an analytical rather than an experimental view, shall we say. But I think in good courses you give students both. And you know, people sometimes say that competency-based qualifications are not as good or as challenging as more abstract ones. But the PhD exam, the PhD qualification, is perhaps a perfect example of how a competency-based qualification can really stretch you intellectually. So I'm comfortable we've got the balance right.
Well, and in terms of the balance, let's assume that somebody from the US or Canada or the UK wanted to spend just one semester in Kazakhstan at Nazarbayev University. Could they do that?
Yes, indeed, we would welcome it. We already have a program where we encourage our students to spend at least one semester out of Kazakhstan at one of our partner universities. That's always a good thing for students to do, in my experience, not just in Kazakhstan, wherever they are. Equally, one of the most important things of being at a university is encountering a diverse student body. People who look at the world differently to you, who talk differently to you, perhaps think about things differently to you. And we're very keen on bringing in people for one semester or longer to get the Kazakhs experience for themselves, and also to be stretched and stimulated by being in a different part of the world. And similarly, the same thing will happen for our students.
Well, and in terms of going back and forth in different parts of the world, my understanding is the Kazakhstan government has funded quite a few students to go to different universities around the world. But now it seems that it's kind of interesting that they're spending all this money to put together this new university. Yeah. Aren't you essentially sending the best students elsewhere then?
This is another example of how bold and visionary the leadership of Kazakhstan came. Post-independence, when it really didn't have very much money at all, it committed millions and millions of dollars to sending its very best and brightest young Kazakhs abroad for education, because they thought that was the best investment for their future. And that continues to this day. It's called BOLO Shock. That's the Kazakh word for future. Historically, the BOLO Shock program used to have both undergraduates and postgraduates. What's happened now with the arrival of Nazarbayev University is that those students that traditionally would have done undergraduate studies abroad now come to us. But for graduate studies, masters and PhDs, the BOLO Shock program still allows the finest young minds of Kazakhstan to experience the very best Western education. So the situation is evolving. They're going from spending money with other people to creating their own capability, but the commitment to an educated population, I don't think they've ever wavered from.
Well, how would that work exactly then? So in an ideal sense that you would attract the very best students from Astana or somewhere else.
From around the country, yeah.
And they would come to your university, and then maybe they would go and get an MBA in the US or elsewhere, and then go back home?
Yes, indeed. I mean, we're only, at the undergraduate level, we're only running up to the junior year, the third or the fourth 4 years. But all the indications are that about half our students want to move on to graduate studies. So once they graduated from us, they could either do graduate studies with us, and we'd encourage that, or it's possible for them to apply for BOLO Shock funding. They can go abroad, and after their studies, they have an obligation to come back and work for the country, in the country for 5 years.
And what are the most popular majors?
Oh, engineering is always the #1 topic in this part of the world. Engineering is the prestige profession. Sciences, maths, physics. Outside the STEM subjects, actually economics is extremely popular, and perhaps surprisingly for you, political science.
And where would a student go with a political science degree in Kazakhstan?
To do postgraduate study, you mean?
And for their careers?
Oh, it's possible for them to work for the government, to work for the oil companies, the big mineral companies. The Kazakh economy is growing rapidly. Okay, so there is a huge need for people with a range of skills.
And let's say I wanted to study the history of music in Kazakhstan. Could I do that at Nazarbayev University?
We do Central Asian history. We haven't yet got to ethnic musicography. I didn't manage to hire anyone this week in DC in that area. So if there are any ethnic musicographers, let me know. But certainly, we are not just a STEM-based institution. We view the arts, humanities and the social sciences as being equally important in the development of a society.
Well, fair enough. We only have another minute or two to go. So before we say goodbye, are there things that you would like to say to an American audience who may be learning about Nazarbayev University for the very first time? And for that matter, may be learning about Kazakhstan for the very first time and the education system at Kazakhstan for the very first time?
Well, there's a general thing, which is that in the 21st century, wealth, power and influence is migrating east. As a consequence of that, interesting initiatives in economy, in education, and in other aspects, even areas like sport, are also migrating east. If you look at countries like Kazakhstan, like Korea, Singapore, and you're interested in education, China as well obviously, I think you'll find some very interesting and very challenging educational ideas. Don't copy them directly, but take inspiration from them, reflect on them, and see how those ideas could be used to improve or enhance your own provision at home.
And do you think that that is actually going to happen for thousands and thousands of students or hundreds of students, or how many students do you really see leaving New York or Washington or Los Angeles to go to Kazakhstan?
Oh, I think that by definition that's going to be limited. But if I told you 25 years ago that thousands of people would go all the way to the United Arab Emirates to study in Dubai, you'd have said to me, Dubai? Where's that? What's that? Why on earth would anyone go there? The truth is the world is changing rapidly, and people who are comfortable with working in and interacting with a globalized and networked society, I think are those who will have the personal and economic benefits in the future. So there's a lot to be said for it.
Well, I think that's a fair point. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. If you would like additional information about Dr. Simon Jones, please visit www.nu.edu.kz. If you have comments or suggestions about higher education today, please send an email to our viewer mailbox at highereducationtoday@topcolleges.com. Thank you for watching. We will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. Please join me again for another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm Stephen Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.